Hello all, I'm King John, you're you, and you're awesome, so you keep doing what you're doing. I'm also a big history buff, and I want to take a moment to talk about a comparison that I don't think anyone's really made. I want to compare the British attack on Taranto to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, it's not untrue. It's a little untrue to say that no one's ever made a comparison because they're very similar attacks. If you haven't heard about the Battle of Taranto, that's not too uncommon. It's certainly not as famous as Pearl Harbor. I heard, I think, about half a year before the attack on Pearl Harbor, the British Mediterranean fleet actually been planning it for quite some time, expecting some kind of conflict with Italy. A single British carrier, I think it was the Illustrious, launched an attack of 21 swordfish biplanes to attack Taranto at night, and were very successful. Now, it's open to interpretation just how much the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was inspired by the attack on Taranto. It is true that the Japanese had been planning some kind of attack on Pearl Harbor since before the attack on Taranto, but it's also true that Japanese military paid very close attention to the attack on Taranto, and they studied it extensively, and very specifically sent all the information they could gather from the attack on Taranto to the men who were planning the attack on Pearl Harbor. So people still argue about it. So it wasn't entirely based on the attack on Taranto, but there certainly was some input. Now I want to talk a little about this from a particular comparison. The attack on Taranto was much better than the attack on Pearl Harbor. Hot take. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at the comparison. Let's look at the forces involved. So, some people claim that Pearl Harbor was better, or people I've talked to about this have said that Pearl Harbor was better because the Japanese did more damage at Pearl Harbor. It took longer for the U.S. Navy to recover. Well, let's look at the forces involved. The British launched 21 planes. The Japanese launched 353. I think 53. 50-something. That's a lot more. Now, both the British and the Japanese specifically targeted enemy battleships. The British sunk 3 battleships. 3 Italian battleships were sunk at Taranto. The Japanese sunk or heavily damaged 7 American battleships. They did slightly damage an 8th, but it remained in service. It wasn't put in dry dock or anything, so you really can't count it. Anyway, so 21 planes sunk 3 battleships. 353 planes sunk or heavily damaged 7. That means that compared to the forces involved, the British were like 8 times more effective than the Japanese. Now both the British and Japanese did sink and damage smaller ships, but usually only as targets of opportunity. They specifically went after enemy battleships. So, just based on that alone, I am very confident in saying that the British attack on Taranto was much better than the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. But there's more. Because remember, the attack on Pearl Harbor was a treacherous sneak attack in times of peace. The U.S. Navy had no idea that there was any kind of hostilities coming. So, the Japanese were attacking an enemy almost literally while they were sleeping. Well, in some cases, literally. The British were attacking the Italians after some number of years of war between the two. I don't remember the exact dates. So the Japanese were ready. Not only were they ready because knew they were fighting a war, they knew the British were coming. Because although the British had tried to make it a sneak attack, the Italians, had detected a British flying boat flying over Taranto Harbor the day before the attack, and so they were sure that something was coming, and they were ready. They were waiting. They had thousands of anti-aircraft guns ready. They had barrage balloons. They had anti-torpedo nets. They had every weapon they had to fight the British attack was ready and waiting. Compared to the U.S. To Americans at Pearl Harbor, they were caught so completely by surprise that literally not one anti-aircraft gun went into action, other than machine guns. Now, both the British and Japanese, as percentage of the forces involved, lost similar number of airplanes. So, facing lesser opposition, the Japanese lost statistically as just as big a part of their force. And there's more, because the attack on Taranto was much better planned than the attack on Pearl Harbor. Because, again, comparing the opposition, everything the Italians had worked the way it was supposed to. The possible exception of the anti-torpedo nets, which may or may not have been effective. Anyway, it's again, some historians argue about this. Whereas when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, a lot of things went wrong for the Americans. There was a radar set that detected the Japanese, but it was the operators were not able to alert the harbor defenses in time. There was a code breaker in Washington D.C. who was decoding the Japanese telegram, and he realized that something was about to happen, and he rushed to warn the people at Pearl Harbor. There's an awful lot of things, and if any one of them had gone slightly differently, the Japanese would have walked into a much harder fight, and they would have taken much higher losses and would have done a lot less damage to the Americans. Speaking of damage, there's more to it than battleships. I talked a little about the smaller vessels involved, but also the British targeted harbor facilities a lot more than the Japanese did. For example, the British specifically targeted Italian fueling facilities at Taranto, whereas the Japanese completely ignored the American fueling facilities at Pearl Harbor, which is something that a lot of historians say was a gigantic mistake, and yeah, it really was. So, just for a lot of reasons, Taranto was just a much better operation. But there is more. Again, because the Japanese, they got so lucky. They had so much luck going into this. It's almost unbelievable. They wanted to hit the American carriers as well. They missed them. I think of the 3 American carriers, 2 of them were somewhere else, but the Enterprise, I think it was the Enterprise, was at Pearl Harbor. It was actually outside at sea conducting some exercises at the time. They launched an attack on the Japanese. As soon as the Japanese were detected. I told you that already. It was too late to defend the harbor, but not too late to avenge it, because, like I said, Enterprise received information on where the Japanese were, launched a carrier strike, but unfortunately they missed. I don't remember exactly what happened. I believe the Japanese position was misreported, which happened a lot in the Pacific to both sides. But again, if things had turned out very slightly differently, the Japanese would have taken a carrier strike when their own planes were landing. They would have been incredibly vulnerable and likely would have taken a lot of damage, perhaps lost a few carriers even. The British, in contrast, after they launched their attack, they immediately were able to ensure by their own efforts, not luck, not Italian failures, that their ships were not subject to any major attack. Now, some critical person might say, well, yes, but that's because the British attacked at night. Yes, the British attacked at night. They were able to attack at night. The Japanese could not attack at night. In fact, the British Royal Navy Air Service was literally the only naval air service in the world that was capable of launching an attack like that at night. So the British were just much better prepared and much better to launch a much better planned and better carried out attack than the Japanese could. So anyway, that's my hot take. Now, there's a lot I don't know about history, and a lot I don't know about Pearl Harbor or Taranto. I'm just some guy, on the internet even. So, I could be wrong. Even kings are wrong sometimes. So if you think I'm wrong, please let me know. Or if you think I'm right, please let me know. I want to hear about you. If you have more details about this to share, or you think there's something I've left out, please let me know. I want to know. I love history. I especially love military history. Come by it honestly. I got it from my father. Anyway, so that's all I got to say on this topic anyway. I got lots more to talk about. I love the sound of my own voice. Thank you for watching, and whatever happens, I hope you have a lovely day.